Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. It is the B&B show and I'm very happy to announce that I am joined with Ben Jacobs. Ben, thank you very, very much for coming back onto the show.
Yeah, great to be here. We're both a little grey today, aren't we?
We are a little grey, and if you tune in for the first time, Ben is an excellent journalist who'll be joining us and answering all of our Manchester United questions, so I'm excited to get into that. But before we commence with the questioning, which I'm sure Ben is ready for, I just wanted to take a moment before we talk football to pause, because today marks 68 years since the Munich air disaster, one of the most poignant days in Manchester United club's history. On the 6th of February in 1958, we lost 23 lives to the Munich air disaster. The Busby Babes, a team built on youth, courage and belief, were taken from us far too soon. A side that wasn't just winning trophies, but winning hearts as well. And today we remember them, we honour the Busby Babes and carry their legacy with us, because at this football club and all around the world, they are never forgotten. So wanted to put that out there and pause to remember them today on all days where we remember that Munich air disaster and the Busby Babes of Manchester United. But Ben, let's get into the show.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And again, just to reiterate that, thoughts with everyone affected. It's a very sad day for the club. I know that there's an Old Trafford service and that representatives from the Manchester Munich Memorial Foundation will also be present and leading tributes as well, and wreaths laid, plus I believe a 2-minute silence as well. So yeah, really, really sad day, and naturally important that Manchester United and the wider community mark it and remember all of those that lost their lives and were affected.
Exactly, and this is why the show was started a little bit earlier as well, because all of us in and around Manchester will be heading down there to go and pay our respects at that time. So with that being said, let's get into all of the news that we need to cover before we go and do that. So starting off, Ben, I wanted to talk a little bit about the secret mystery transfer of the January transfer window, just because within the January transfer window, there's so much going on and there's so many different elements to a transfer. And, you know, it's always hard to sort of be respectful when all information can't be out there because of what's going on during that transfer period. So there's been a lot of talk about that. Is there any more details that you can reveal about that secret transfer that we did speak about a lot on the United Stand shows and was talked about throughout social media when that news came out?
Yeah, I can tell you now that the secret midfielder explored was Wilfred Ndidi, and it was secret because it was early stages and fluid, because at the time Matt Hargreaves was holding a conversation with Besiktas and the Ndidi representatives. They didn't know whether it was going to be Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the former manager of Ndidi, who brought him to Besiktas, or alternatively Michael Carrick. So Matt Hargreaves held a conversation with the player camp and with Besiktas to see if anything short-term would be possible. And my understanding is that Wilfred Ndidi was very open to Manchester United. Manchester United had explored Ndidi again on a short-term deal after it was clear that he was leaving Leicester following their relegation to the Championship. And at that stage, you had Everton that were really pushing, and Al-Ali in Saudi Arabia as well. But Ndidi went off to AFCON, and he's the Besiktas captain. And Manchester United held talks with Michael Carrick, who had reintegrated Kobbie Mainoo, and they decided that they didn't want to do another midfielder now, and they're going to wait until the summer. Now, naturally, when we get to the summer, Ndidi is not expected to be a candidate. So this was something on a loan with a buy option in the region of about 12 million euros that could have happened. It was considered. Manchester United went to Besiktas and asked for the terms to be outlined. So did Ajax as well. But in the end, a few things happened. The first that we should start with is Ndidi sadly lost his father in a car crash, and our thoughts are obviously with him and his family. And I think that impacted, due to sensitivity, anybody really wanting to push it. And then Ajax made a secondary call and were told by Besiktas that they wanted Ndidi to stay because he's very important to them. So nothing ever came of it in the end, but it was certainly a deal both before Michael Carrick arrived and after that was a point of internal conversation at Manchester United. And after deliberation, they decided not to make a bid.
Was there anybody that Michael Carrick put forward, and did Michael Carrick have any say on whether to progress that Wilfred Ndidi deal within conversations he was having inside the football club once he was announced and working as Manchester United head coach?
Yeah, my understanding is that the target was brought to Carrick and also put to Solskjaer within their recruitment meetings to see whether there was anything last minute out of opportunism, particularly in midfield. And Carrick's point was that he respects Ndidi But he was always going to reintegrate Kobbie Mainoo, which has happened. And even though Casemiro's leaving at the end of the season, this is not about phasing him out. So Carrick and his system changing to a back four now has performing midfielders, and he has the ability to move Bruno Fernandes further forwards, and Bumo's been leading the line. Of course, Cunha can do that or go wide left as well. So I think the challenge with Ruben Amorim was that he was sold on having Bruno Fernandes in a deeper position, and he didn't want to use Kobbie Mainoo, and Manuel Ugarte's form has unfortunately been inconsistent. So Amorim was screaming for a midfielder, and Manchester United in November, December, and still trying to back Amorim, had to look at options because it appeared they were one short, either short term or bringing forward some of the summer business. But Carrick's perspective is that Kobbie Mainoo is effectively like a new signing, which might sound strange to people listening, but when you've been frozen out and then you go back to being a starter, that's definitely kind of an extra resource as far as Carrick is concerned. And his input was certainly, if they find the right opportunity, go for it. But he wasn't as desperate for a January midfielder as Ruben Amorim was.
Just to kind of talk about Kobbie Mainoo a little bit, it was something I was going to bring in later on in the show, but since we've brought him up, I do want to touch on him before we get into some more transfer activity. There's a lot of talks right now about Kobbie Mainoo potentially signing a new deal and about what that wage structure is going to be like. Some reports I've seen have said it's going to quadruple his salary, taking it to over 100 grand a week, like 125 grand a week. I mean, can you give us a little bit of insight on the background of Kobbie Mainoo? How close was he to joining Napoli in that January transfer window? How close was he to leaving? And then his resurgence now, 3 wins in 3 starts, and a lot of reports about a new contract that will be willingly signed. That's what's being put out there. Is the truth in that?
Yeah, I mean, Kobbie Mainoo wanted Napoli when Ruben Amorim was at the club, and only on a loan, because he effectively wanted to perform, come back, and then be part of the first team plans. And if Mainoo was ever going to leave Manchester United, it was always reluctant. And this is why he felt temporary to get minutes ahead of the World Cup. But he's now got those minutes at Manchester United. So I'm not aware of Mainoo ever saying he wants to leave Man United permanently. He only ever stressed that he was frustrated with his lack of opportunities under Ruben Amorim, and he wanted to get game time ahead of the World Cup. And with Amorim going, he's outlasted the manager, and that problem has gone away. So if Kobbie Mainoo is playing and performing, which he is, then all parties were always going to go to the other extreme and start thinking about rewarding him. And Manchester United kind of have to, because you can't be a regular and important first team player at Manchester United and have a discrepancy in your wage compared to other senior players. And I don't know the exact number, but broadly speaking, if Mainoo is to be raised at the same financial level as the vast majority of the club, his wage will have to be quadrupled. It's as simple as that. So they've got 2 options. One is that they can bake in incentivization and top up his wage in the short term whilst they discuss a new long-term deal, and that's a possibility. Or they can just keep him as is and move as fast as possible to get him to sign a new deal. But the days are gone now where Manchester United might consider pure profit sale, or Kobbie Mainoo might ask to leave on loan. That was Amorim. And as you can imagine, the hierarchy when Amorim was in charge wanted to back their manager. And as a consequence, they had to think about, is there a number out there where we would just sell for pure profit because you've got an asset that's not playing? But now everyone's back on the same page. And I think it highly likely that Kobbie Mainoo starts a big proportion of games. And if he continues performing, then that new deal will come sooner rather than later, because everyone's pulling once again in the same direction, which shows you that Ruben Amorim may have been disappointed that he was a head coach, not a manager, but it's obvious that he was given a lot of autonomy within his selection. And now he's gone. Kobbie Mainoo is only thinking about Manchester United, and Manchester United are only thinking about Kobbie Mainoo.
I do want to talk about other transfer targets and looking ahead to the summer, but it's an interesting point, that Kobbie Mainoo situation. I just want to ask you from your perspective and your insight into the ongoings behind the scenes at the football club. Do you think if Ruben Amorim would have stayed, Mainoo would have left on loan or permanently stressed from what he wanted was a loan? Do you think he would have left in January and United would have gone out and got an Ndidi or a different midfielder for Ruben Amorim?
I mean, it's possible, but by the same token, Manchester United have been adamant for months when I've spoken to sources that Mainoo's not going to be given a loan just for World Cup purposes, and the same for Joshua Xerxes. So there was a point in time, probably late December, first week in January, where Roma were pushing for Xerxes and Napoli were in conversations for Mainoo, and each player couldn't have done anything more. They'd effectively agreed terms, they wanted to go, and it was Manchester United delaying. So we've had quite a consistent Manchester United approach in all of this, that they don't want to weaken their depth in midfield or in attack, regardless of what the two players wanted. And I think the other point worth making is that with Amorim, he wanted to keep Mainoo as a squad option and add a midfielder. So it wasn't necessarily about bringing in an Ndidi or another short-term solution in order to unlock anything with Mainoo, because Kobbie Mainoo was still somebody that Ruben Amorim liked. He just thought he needed a bit more development within his system and more work being done off the ball. Carrick disagrees. He's straight back into the starting lineup, and things look dramatically different to how they did under Amorim. But I'm not aware at any point over the summer when we first broke the story about Mainoo exploring options on TalkSport, or even in that early period of January when Ruben Amorim was still at the club for a few days, I'm not aware of any point in time where Manchester United ever directly communicated to either Xerxes or Mainoo that they would be allowed to leave on loan.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way that things were happening over that January transfer window, and it ultimately ended up in Manchester United doing nothing. Before I talk about summer targets, there was a lot of fans that were pretty disappointed that Manchester United didn't act in January with the mid-season inactivity. Do you think that United were ever really serious about doing any business in that January transfer window? We heard about the Semenyo, we heard about, if there was an option available. Do you think that there was actually any serious hunger from Manchester United to go out in the January transfer window and strengthen, or do you think it was always, let's just, get this January transfer window out of the way and focus on the summer then?
No, I think they showed that they were serious by actually bidding for Antoine Semenyo and committing give or take to the release clause, or at least matching it. So that was bringing forward summer budget and a target. And if the right opportunities presented themselves, Manchester United would have been in the conversation. But obviously, how the window would have panned out if Ruben Amorim was still the manager might have been a bit different to now, because Ruben Amorim, if he'd have stayed for all of January and either turned results around or been supported, would have been hammering home to Ineos and club executives throughout the entire month that he wanted at least one player, if not two, to come through the door. He went, and Carrick's perspective is to be maybe a little bit more of a team player, to try and deal with the squad that he's inherited, because he knows in likelihood that he'll be gone in the summer and a new manager will come in. So everyone's now pulling in the same direction. And as a result, the fallout between Amorim and Jason Wilcox over recruitment and the remit of the manager disappeared as soon as Amorim went. And I think the fact that Carrick's willing to say, if you can't find the right opportunity, I'll work with what I've got, ultimately led to a quiet January. And we'll never know if that had been exactly the same under Ruben Amorim, because he went so early in the month of January. But Manchester United tried. I mean, they were looking at midfielders and asking about the terms for Ndidi. They were offered Ruben Loftus-Cheek at the beginning of the window. They explored Ruben Neves, but it was too expensive. And as I revealed on this show, in fact, Al Hilal were trying. Al Hilal were pushing. Neves was using leverage of other clubs to get a better offer out of Al Hilal. They improved the terms. They added one extra year. It was originally only a 2-year offer. They upped the wage a little bit and he signed a new deal. So this whole narrative around Ruben Neves is available was never there. And even if he was there, it was kind of too expensive, because anyone coming in central midfield is juxtaposed in their thinking against targets that maybe are only available in the summer, the likes of your Elliot Andersons, Adam Whartons, and so on. So Manchester United had to be quite cautious in the market. And once again, I say what I said before, the club's position was, if nothing happens, that's the plan. Now, clubs say that because then if it's quiet, you go, well, we were expecting it and nobody's disappointed. And yet many clubs say that and still try behind the scenes. So there is a slight contradiction there between trying but deciding in the end not to add anyone. And I think that is just because they didn't want to panic buy and the right market opportunities in the end were not available, coupled with the fact that Carrick's come in, he's got an instant response, he's changed the system, he's got Mainoo back, the AFCON players have returned as well. So suddenly Manchester United have got momentum and maybe there's less logic to rock the boat.
Just off the back of that, there's, Semenyo there was a player that we did try for in the January transfer window. That was well reported. You reported it on the show way before the conversations even really started to go public with Semenyo and Man City and Manchester United. It was reported by you that United were in that race that developed and we tried for him. Left wing does seem like an area that Manchester United are going to continue to try and pursue. There's a lot of people asking about potential left wing options for Manchester United coming into the summer. Is there any targets that you know of as of yet that are making it into that short list of left wingers that United could potentially make a move for in the summer?
Yeah, we know that there's appreciation for Yan Diomande, who's a very versatile player. Leipzig are kind of grandstanding at the moment, saying that's a €100 million sale. We'll have to wait and see whether that price drops during the summer. But as I've reported many times, there was never really an expectation that he was going to go anywhere in the winter window, barring a crazy offer, and Tottenham could be there as well. Manchester United really like Anthony Gordon as well as a potential option, especially knowing that the player actually relishes the chance to have more game time through the centre as a number 9 as well. And Arsenal have been there in the past. I think Newcastle's position, a bit like Sandro Tonali, is not for sale. When they had more of a PSR problem, Gordon nearly went to Liverpool, but in the end, Newcastle were able to sell Elliot Anderson and Yakuba Minter to Nottingham Forest and Brighton respectively, and that stopped them letting Anthony Gordon go. I don't get the impression that Gordon is sort of sky high on the Manchester United list of targets. There's appreciation, but it's not much more than that at this stage. And I think if they do go for a box office left winger due to cost, and you could even argue form at the moment, I'm not so sure that they'll make an approach to Newcastle United. But the original connection actually came through Dan Ashworth during his brief spell at the club, and Gordon was one of the left-sided players, again very versatile though, that was put forwards. And Kenan Yildiz is the other one, and we hear a lot of talk about a potential Premier League move. And actually the player's very keen on joining a Premier League club and is not that fussed, from what I'm told, whether it's instant Champions League football versus just a project where he can get that particular tournament. And naturally, Manchester United are not the only club making exploratory calls at the moment to try and further understand the situation. Arsenal are another. And remember, Arsenal are likely to lose Gabriel Martinelli and possibly Leandro Trossard as well. So there may be a situation where they can go really big and try and sign a kind of box office starting winger or versatile attacker. And the beauty of Yildiz is that he can play left, he can play right, he can play through the centre, he can be an 8, he can be a 10, he can be a second striker. And although we don't know who the new Manchester United manager is, if there's continuity with this Carrick system, it will favour in the recruitment market players that are versatile, like also Cunha and Mbeumo, that can play in more than one position. The challenge is that the valuation of that particular player is €100 million or more. And this is the big test of Manchester United. And can they get Champions League football? And can they utilise, despite financial fair play, the first summer of squad cost ratio, where you get a little bit more rope to work with? Because in the first season of the new domestic rules, the punishments don't come into force because they're transitioning them in. And that's where I expect Manchester United to go really gung-ho and aggressive before every possible punishment is actually eligible to be handed out to you. And I think many teams will take advantage of that loophole, even though they may, of course, have to abide by financial fair play and lower financial thresholds. So this is the decision making now within Manchester United. Do they chuck their 200 million or so on 2 elite midfielders? Does that get over the fact that Casemiro's going? Manuel Ugarte still has Ajax on his radar. Bruno Fernandes has a release clause, and you can offset some of that spend on outgoings or wage savings in the case of Casemiro, and then still maybe have budget to go for a box office left winger? Or do they go for one big central midfielder, another more economical one, and then put all of that money over on the left-hand side. And then the last thing to say, and we don't have the answer to be perfectly honest yet, is Ruben Amorim was of the belief, which is kind of why Man United tried for the Chelsea-bound player Giovanni Quenda, that they could get a left-back, left winger, and Quenda falls into that category, whereas these names that I've mentioned are far more traditional wide forwards or left wingers. And if they go down that route, they might also sign a fullback. And as I think we said last week or on deadline day, it'll be fascinating to see whether the recruitment team continue to agree with Ruben Amorim's perspective that it's a left-sided fullback that is necessary, or actually if they go for someone more versatile, or even decide it's the right side that needs addressing.
I love that sort of insight and the direction that Manchester United are taking in the summer, especially with the new rules that are coming into place. And it's going to be interesting to see how Manchester United sort of attack that portion of the window, because a lot of fans are expecting big things after having quite a quiet January, and the amount of transitions that are going to be happening this summer, like you say, with Casemiro leaving and maybe some other players that have decisions to make on their future, and that left wing spot, being maybe more of a prominent figure that needs to be looked into to bring someone in because of the changing system that we suspect will continue. We'll talk about the manager situation very shortly, but before I bring some super chats in, I just wanted to follow on from the budget from the summer and the financial rules. So I wanted to ask you, what sort of budget do you think Man United will have with Champions League without, and could you briefly explain the changes to the transfer rules in terms of them rules? Because I know, some people watch the show every week, some people will just be tuning in. And what is the explanation to how Manchester United can take advantage of that?
Could you briefly explain the new SCR
I know
rules?
You don't know what briefly means, Ben, but we love you for it.
I mean, it's near impossible to explain them briefly. So the short layman's term answer before I send everyone to sleep is you get more rope if you bring in more revenue. The slightly longer answer is that clubs can spend 85% of their total revenue on transfer fees, on wages and agent fees. The even longer answer is that you've still got to abide by a lower financial fair play threshold of 70%. So qualifying for the Champions League or any UEFA competition means in many ways that these extra leeways being given by squad cost ratio present you with a challenge, because you have to conform with the UEFA rules anyway. But if you have high finances and no cap, and you're dealing only with the domestic rules, you can essentially spend more than under PSR. And then the way that it will work in 2026, 2027 is there will be a so-called green threshold set at that number, 85%. So whatever revenue you bring in, you can spend 85% of it on transfers, on agent fees, and on wages. And then there is a red threshold. Now, I'm not going to go into the red threshold, because the more you go above the green threshold, effectively, the more the red threshold is reined in, and the gap between green and red percentage-wise narrows. So everyone's red threshold over time may be a little bit different. But broadly speaking, SCR covers 1 year of financial activity, and its limit is higher than the UEFA threshold. And as a consequence, clubs that are very known for their revenue but not in Europe will be able to go on a big summer spend compared to PSR. And clubs that are abiding by financial fair play could try and find some loopholes to go big during the summer, but will still have to understand that the UEFA number of 70% of spending from total revenue on transfers, on agent fees, and on wages will be unalterable. So if you go too high, then you are going to be in breach of UEFA, even if you're fine as far as the domestic rules are concerned. So then what is Manchester United's budget? Well, it will be contingent on, do they get Champions League football, and on outgoings as well. So there's no sort of set number. And what clubs generally do is they budget quite conservatively when over the summer they know exactly what they've got, including projected Champions League money. And by conservatively, what I guess is worth noting, because we're not talking about football terms here, we're only talking about finances. So you can have a football ambition that is sky high, but on your books, your financial aim will be very low. So I can tell you categorically, Manchester United this season will not have budgeted for Champions League football. They may not have even budgeted for any European football simply because of where they finished last season. It doesn't mean the football aim isn't Champions League football. It just means you always budget conservatively and then try and have sky high ambition. And if they qualify for the Champions League, they won't be going, great, let's put 150 million to the quarterfinals or whatever onto our books. They'll be saying, let's budget for going out at the league phase, and everything else is a very pleasant financial surprise. And that way you're prudent and you're sustainable. Plus, there will be outgoings and departures. Casemiro's wage coming off the books. Marcus Rashford still expected to join Barcelona in some capacity. Bruno Fernandes has got his release clause. Harry Maguire's on a big wage. If he ends up reducing, that's the saving, and extending. If he ends up going, that entire wage, like Casemiro's, comes off the book as well. So people would just like me to say, because they're bored by the financial rules answer, and they're thinking, for the love of God, Ben Jacobs, just give us one number. And how is that number not the same as Arsenal or Liverpool spent somewhere between 250 million and 450 million? But that's not really how it works, because Man United will be looking at net spend. And the more they bring in terms of revenue or outgoings, the more they'll be able to spend. All of that said, and putting it a bit simpler, my expectation is that 2 elite midfielders will arrive. So will a left wing back and or a left winger, and maybe a number 9 as well. And Manchester United are therefore prepared to go out and attack the market to the tune of in excess of £200 million. And maybe even that number can be a whole lot higher if they get Champions League football as well. But it's not a fixed number or a transfer kitty. It's about understanding what they've got in the summer, maybe maximising the 1 year limbo period where you can take advantage of the domestic rules, coupled with any outgoings. And naturally, if Casemiro's wage, which is a huge saving, was accompanied by a Bruno Fernandes departure, a Joshua Zirkzee sale, I'm obviously just giving the extreme scenario where everyone goes, you're already generating, in likelihood, well over 100 million in terms of cumulative savings for those players. And then you can spend all of that and get back to zero. So the short answer is basically Manchester United are prepared and budgeting, to my knowledge, in the summer to have a big summer and to spend more than they bring in. But the more they bring in, the more they'll be able to spend. And that's why it's a little bit early to be talking about specific numbers. But I would be surprised if they don't have an outlay on transfers, regardless of what comes in, of over 200 million.
Well, it's exciting. It's something to look forward to in the summer. And I know a lot of people are frustrated with the lack of January business, myself included as a Manchester United fan. I'm just really hoping that they do follow through in the summer and we sign some top quality, in particular, midfielders, because we know that's an area that Manchester United need to go into the market for. And on that, there is some super chats coming in, Ben, that I want to put to you. So Daniel Thompson has said, hope you well, Beth, Ben and the United stand. Forever in our hearts, always remembered, never forgotten, eternally loved, cherished and treasured. Their spirits go on forevermore. Their legacy immortal. We love and always remember the Busby babes. What a lovely message, Daniel. Thank you very much for putting that into the chat. And I think it's a brilliant message to put out there on this Friday afternoon. Amit says, Tonali and Baleba could come next season for sure. Thoughts? Ben, Baleba is somebody that we know is a target for Manchester United. He's been talked about for a long time now. But this Tonali name has started to come into the mix, and it started happening on deadline day when there was confusion about whether he was being offered to Arsenal or not. I mean, is Tonali a realistic target, or is it one that's being kind of publicised now because of all of that media noise?
Yeah, I think it was Arsenal and Tonali more on deadline day. I'm not aware of Manchester United entering that race at this stage. They will be looking for a player in that profile. We know that Elliot Anderson is kind of the top choice cumulatively in all positions for the summer, and he has the advantage of being able to play as a 6 or an 8 because he's versatile. Carlos Baleba, Adam Wharton, Angelo Stiller might be there as well, but Tonali's not one I've heard a whole lot about as far as Manchester United are concerned, and Newcastle's position is really clear that they don't want to sell. It might have to be a kind of Isak style situation where if the player wants to go during the summer, he forces his way out. Maybe that's why we're starting to get some rumours at this stage. But I do think it's different to the Isak situation because Isak felt let down a year before he left Newcastle due to a lack of a contract offer from the new sporting director, Paul Mitchell, whereas Tonali was banned for gambling offences and has felt like Newcastle have been deeply supportive during that period. And then quietly, whilst he was out, Newcastle actually rewarded him and extended his contract and gave him a better wage. So I think Tonali is genuinely happy at Newcastle. He's not said that he wants to leave. And at this stage, it's probably fair to say Arsenal are interested, but I haven't heard much in terms of concrete talks or approaches from the perspective of Man United.
And then I saw some reports this morning. I don't know if it was reports actually, or if it was Kobbie just talking about it in terms of a fantasy or something from his perspective. But there's a little bit on Bruno Guimaraes and the fact that he's got 2 years left in his contract. Could he be looking for a move? City have been interested multiple times. Is there anything at all on his movement in the summer? Because for me, I think I think Tonali is also top class, but Bruno Guimaraes is another player in a position that United should be looking at, I think.
Yeah, with Bruno Guimaraes, my understanding is there's kind of a verbal agreement in place that for £80 million for a Champions League club, Newcastle would engage, but there's nothing necessarily formal in that contract. And that's a lot of money for a player that, as you say, has a contract that's ticking down. Bruno Guimaraes has kind of been Geordie through and through. Every time there's been speculation over an exit, he's been sure to kiss the badge. And as a consequence, he wouldn't be a player that falls into the Isak category of being desperate to leave Newcastle United. I'm still told that if somebody is to move for Bruno Guimaraes within England, it's more likely to be Manchester City than Manchester United, and City will likely be in the conversation for Elliot Anderson as well. Bruno Guimaraes has never had a formal offer to leave Newcastle United, but clubs including Manchester City and even Real Madrid have held talks with the player side to better understand his expectations and what he's looking to do in the long run. But I would say at this stage, it's just really difficult to do business with Newcastle because Paul Mitchell has gone. They've now got an excellent sporting director in Ross Wilson. They've got a relatively new CEO in David Hopkinson. And the team are trying to protect Eddie Howe. And off the back of the Isak saga, adamant that nobody's going to be sold. Now, if Newcastle don't get Champions League football, which is tough for them as the league table currently stands, let's see where they are in the summer and what their financial position is. But right now, it's far too early to be talking about your Livramentos, your Tonalis, your Bruno Guimaraeses, your Anthony Gordons, because Newcastle are absolutely clear off the back of the Isak saga that they want to keep this squad together for Eddie Howe.
Can Man City stop going after good players that we want? That'd be very, very nice. I mean, to be fair, they were interested in Bruno Guimaraes a long time ago. That's been like an ongoing saga. But, you know what, why don't they... I mean, I would take either Bruno Guimaraes or Elliot Anderson for Manchester United, but they can go for one, we'll go for the other. That it can work out like that. I don't know. It's one of them things. We'll have to wait until the summer, but there's going to be some really interesting transfer stories, I think, going into this summer for sure. We have Amit saying, Ben, do you reckon Bruno could be the player of the league?
I mean, maybe we're still talking about Bruno Guimaraes, or we're moving on to Bruno Fernandes.
He's talking about Bruno Fernandes.
The entire player of the league, as in the best player this season.
Yeah, he means PFA Player of the Year, I think.
I don't think so. I mean, Bruno Fernandes has been magnificent and a joy to watch and incredibly unique, but there's just quite simply this season stronger and better and more informed players. And that's partially because Bruno Fernandes was playing under a deeper role under Ruben Amorim. So for me, there's other contenders at this stage, but let's see what the second half of the season brings. I'd love to see it given to somebody that is a bit different, a bit left field. Igor Thiago, for example, what a signing he's been, scoring for fun at the moment. I think that Mark Gahey is a contender, even though Crystal Palace kind of tailed off in the last few games that he was there. So now we're going to have to understand what he does at Manchester City. And then in terms of Man United, I think we'd have a smaller data pool to look at, but let's see from after Amorim left until the end of the season, how Kobbie Mainoo performs, what Cunha does, now that he's fit and playing regularly, and Mbeumo after he returns from the African Cup of Nations, because for me, those three are going to be absolutely vital players for Manchester United if they're to get Champions League football.
Absolutely, I'm excited for the rest of the season, Ben. There's still there's the percentages and everything flying about at the moment. I'm not taking any notice of them, of what's going to happen, Champions League or what. But we're hoping for a win tomorrow, and I'm going to get your prediction about that at the end of the show, actually. Amit has also said, Ben is like Walker White from Breaking Bad. Smarty. Amit also...
Walker White from Breaking Bad.
Do you like that one?
I do like that one, yeah.
You can start using that one. Amit
Wasn't it Walter White, though?
Yeah, it's Walter White, but he's put Walker. It's probably a spelling mistake. Amit also says United have their own Semenya and his name goes by Dorgu. I love that one. Hoping he recovers as quickly as possible. Walter White, Ben, you can go with that one.
I think it must just be the beard. I mean, he wears kind of like a top hat. And obviously he goes from being a chemistry teacher from memory to a drug dealer hated by everyone. So I don't
was going to say, I hope you're not doing his extracurricular activities behind the scenes.
Was never good at science.
Stick to journalism, Ben. Stick to journalism. But on that topic, I want to move on to the manager situation because that's something that a lot of people are talking about. And I know there's going to be probably only small updates from now until the end of the season as Manchester United are going to try and keep things... I'm pretty sure by the way that, you know, the way this process goes and whom they might be looking at, they'll want to keep it very under wraps. Whether they can get away with that, we'll have to wait and see. But the results under Michael Carrick so far have been incredible. We need him to win again tomorrow. Let's hope it continues. And, you know, some fans are dreaming that maybe he will be the full-time manager. They're going early, saying to make him the permanent manager. Is that on the minds of Ineos? And if it is or if it's not, who else is in that pool of managers that we can kind of have an update with? Because there was so much talk last night about United potentially meeting Enrique's representatives for talks. There's talks about Thomas Tuchel and whether he'd had conversations before the World Cup or after the World Cup. And then, of course, there's other names that are being put into the shortlist as well. But what's the update on the managerial situation?
Yeah, it's going to be a thorough process, and obviously a few wins, albeit fantastic ones, from Manchester United under Michael Carrick are not going to change that. If Carrick has Premier League winning form to end the season, you would expect him to become a candidate. But as I said before, in old shows, at interview, Carrick was told very clearly that you're there until the end of the season, whilst we can currently run a process. And he doesn't have anything other than Champions League qualification to really make a splash. So you can do it in the Premier League by winning every game. And if that kind of momentum takes them to the summer, how can you ignore Carrick, at least in terms of an interview and as a candidate? Because you've got the continuity, you've got the results, you've got the dressing room buy-in. But it's not an interim gig where he's coming in the knockout stage of the Champions League, the business end of the League Cup and so on. So if he gets top 4 or top 5, great. But the only way that he's going to become a genuine candidate in this thorough process is the manner in which he gets that. As of now, that manner is phenomenal. And if it continues like this and he wins every game, then yes, you would expect him to be a candidate and potentially a strong one. But they won't make a decision on that now or anything rash. And they will start, I'm told, with the feeling that whilst Carrick manages this football club, others will be explored and interviewed. And even with those at the World Cup, they won't want to leave it until the last minute. So I do expect them to sound out Thomas Tuchel before the World Cup, not only after. The other names I'm hearing are, as we've discussed on previous shows, Roberto De Zerbi, and a little bit of a United stand exclusive on this one. I'm told that Roberto De Zerbi was relatively close to either being fired or walking away during the January transfer window. And Marseille and Pablo Longoria, the president, decided in the end, no, we're going to stick with him. But De Zerbi was quite close to saying, I'm done. Then, flash forwards to the summer, and my information is that De Zerbi has decided to leave then instead. So it's not as clear-cut as De Zerbi could have gone and he stayed. I'm told De Zerbi has decided he's going to leave Marseille in the summer regardless. And that's the bit of new news to tell you. So if that transpires, he will be gettable and a free agent and potentially start to be looking at where his next gig is. And De Zerbi is keen to come back to the Premier League. He could be a candidate for Manchester City as well. Then other names, Mauricio Pochettino was part of the first process for the Manchester United job and is expected to leave after the World Cup, where he's managing the USA. You have Kieran McKenna at Ipswich, again, another name that Ineos really liked when they first began the process prior to Ruben Amorim coming in. Let's see if they go down that direction and decide a younger kind of manager is better. My sense is that he might get an interview, but if you're going to go down that route, maybe they would say Michael Carrick might not be a bad option. So it's early stages. There's several names, but I think we kind of know at this stage that Roberto De Zerbi and Thomas Tuchel will be two of them. And there remains a question mark over what Carrick would have to do exactly to really force himself into this conversation.
Interesting stuff, especially on the De Zerbi stuff there, United stand exclusive. That might be of real piquing interest to Ineos, who will like the idea of not having to pay a big get-out clause to De Zerbi and having maybe a more of a smoother transition rather than having to go and negotiate that. And he was on the radar when Erik ten Hag left Manchester United as well. So that's an interesting one. I mean, if Michael Carrick can carry on the way that he is, it'd be hard to rule him out. I'm going to be so honest. He's making me feel so happy as a fan again. But this is what it is in the honeymoon period, isn't it? So we'll have to see how that plays out. And Thomas Tuchel will be with a major tournament with England. So that'll be interesting to see how they'd play it. Do you think they'd organise it beforehand, Ben, with Tuchel?
Well, I think you have to. I mean, the bottom line is that it's Manchester United Football Club. And if they want to make a shortlist and start interviews, anyone, even if they're coming in the summer, will have to abide by that process. I think if someone turns around to Man United and says, if you want me, start the conversation after the World Cup, they'll already have somebody in mind, but they'll want to be discreet and respectful to those that are in any job, let alone a World Cup one. But the process to replace Ruben Amorim has already started. It's not in a formal interview stage, but I would expect that outreach to come between now and the end of the season, even if they had a preferred candidate that they thought would join after the World Cup. It's almost better to try and speak to them now than a month or a week before the tournament starts, or have a will they, won't they join. And it may be less contentious to do that with a Tuchel or a Pochettino, because right now Tuchel and Pochettino's contracts are up anyway in the summer. So unless they're given an extension, everybody knows that they're going to be departing afterwards, which means speaking to them now about a potential vacancy in the summer, if that's what Manchester United choose to do, will not be as disruptive. So the respect actually comes from, don't make this appointment just before or during the World Cup type process if you're speaking to World Cup managers. And as a consequence, Man United have kind of got two choices with those kind of candidates: go to them early, which I expect them to do if they form part of the process, or wait until after the World Cup when it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, then they'll have a bit of time now to speak as well at this stage of the season, heading to the World Cup in the summer. This will probably be where they've got the most amount of time to have them conversations. I mean, my first choice would be Enrique, but that seems quite unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah, just on Enrique, it's complete fake news that he's available this summer. So I'm not saying it's fake news that people don't like him, but it is completely incorrect that, one, he's definitely leaving PSG, and two, that he's a free agent, as some have reported this summer. Luis Enrique's contract expires in summer 2027, and PSG's perspective is really clear on this, that if he doesn't sign a new deal, they want him until summer 2027, and they are trying to get him to sign a new deal. So let's see whether they succeed. And all of this interest in him only helps Luis Enrique gain a little bit of leverage. The other thing is that Luis Enrique had a direct interview with Chelsea for a managerial vacancy now 2 summers ago. And he presented to them. And the presentation, from what I'm told, was not really answering Chelsea's questions. It was more, I'm Luis Enrique, here's a big PDF and a bunch of files on your team. We do it my way or the highway. And he has that empowerment at PSG, despite the fact it's quite a complicated and political club, to have full autonomy, regardless of title. He is a manager, not a head coach, in everything that he does. And it's all on the football side done his way. So Manchester United are going to have to determine whether candidates like that are the right fit in their model. Because people often ask me, well, isn't Tuchel really hands-on, heart on sleeve, fiery? Didn't he fall out with the Chelsea owners? Wasn't it the same with Roberto De Zerbi when he left Brighton? And that was quite acrimonious in the end. But De Zerbi was working in a data-driven model with lots of cooks and recruitment experts, not too dissimilar from Manchester United. And it really only ended badly right in the final few months because there were some high-profile departures and no money was spent. And then with Thomas Tuchel, he didn't really want to get involved in the recruitment at Chelsea. And it was a sticking point because they were adding him to all of the recruitment groups and they wanted him to be a leading voice because at that stage, Chelsea's model wasn't built and Todd Boehly was the sporting director and the owners were brand new. And Tuchel just wanted to focus on football. So we're getting some misrepresentations out there of what kind of personalities will or won't be fits. And I would say that Tuchel and De Zerbi are more collaborative than people realise, even if to the public eye, they appear to be quite fiery in their press conferences and on the touchlines. Whereas with Luis Enrique, he's a whole lot calmer when you meet him. I've interviewed him on several occasions and his demeanour on the touchline is largely the same. But behind the scenes, much like Jurgen Klopp was at Liverpool, he can be quite pushy and insistent on it being his way. And he can push back against this wide collaboration and traditional models that have many voices. So if Manchester United were to go in that direction, they'd have to steal him away from PSG and they would have to be sure that he was a fit. And I'm not so sure with the model that Manchester United are trying to build that they would necessarily see the PSG boss as the right fit, unless after all of this turmoil and all this changing of minds, Ashworth coming and going, Amorim coming and going, Ten Hag coming and going, they turn around and go, the model is wrong. And if they change their model, then it could obviously open up the process of replacing Ruben Amorim to a number of other candidates that weren't a fit pre-Amorim, but would be if they determine that their model needs changing. And we don't know the answer to that yet, which is why it's going to be a fascinating process and a clue within that process in terms of which candidates make the final stages will be whether they're going to stick with this model and these voices or potentially depart from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. Who wouldn't want a two-time treble-winning manager? I mean, that's not the right guy for United. Clearly not. Winning the treble with two different teams? No, we'll pass on him.
I mean, Man
we
United
need someone who'll
managers
collaborate.
Like that. Man United have had managers. This is the sort of interesting thing, I think. And obviously not everything is Ineos. But if you list the Man United managers post to Alex Ferguson, they've literally tried everything from David Moyes, the so-called next Ferguson at the time, to Jose Mourinho, who had won multiple titles, including the Champions League and several Premier Leagues as well.
I still think Mourinho was hard done by at his time at Manchester United. I want to be honest. I do think he was hard done by. I do think we got him a little bit too late, to be honest, within his prime as a manager. But I also think at that time, when you look back, he was very heavily criticised. And I don't think he was thoroughly backed. But anyway.
You're right. And I think that some of that can be down to, as you say, hiring at the wrong time. And some of it can be down to entering into the wrong model. Mourinho didn't like the Tottenham model either. You've had Ralph Rangnick, who, even though he was only an interim, is your mega strategic, ultra collaborative guy. And he says after the collaboration, the club needs open heart surgery. And it hasn't really had that since. And every single manager that's come in, Louis van Gaal, tactician, his appointment excited people at the time, but again, it didn't quite work strategically or at Carrington. Ruben Amorim, supposedly a more bullish, football-focused manager with a clear system and identity and a big reputation. Several Manchester United legends who supposedly understand the so-called DNA of the football club. If you add up all these different managers and whoever the next one is, they've tried pretty much everything. So it's very easy to say, just hire the one with the most successful CV. But I sense that this process is about either finding the right football, strategic and personality fit, or being really brutally honest within the club and going, we've got this model wrong. And then if they change the model, the kinds of managers that might be willing to work for them could be much bigger and more diverse.
It's going to be interesting, that's for sure. It's a great breakdown. Thank you very much. I mean, my last little question before I ask you about the score prediction, is there any update on Bruno Fernandes, on whether he will wait until after the World Cup to decide his future, or if he's now maybe had a change of heart and looking to secure it further in advance, playing super well? I know it's only early stages under Carrick, but is there any update on that, or is it still the same stance?
No real update at the moment. I mean, he'll want to understand his long-term future at the club. He said in that interview with Portuguese TV that he was quite hurt by a feeling, whether perceived or actual, that Man United wanted to sell him to Saudi Arabia. So I think all parties will sit down, and Fernandes will also want to know who the new manager is going to be as well. I have no information as to whether he's going to decide right towards the end of the season, in the summer, or after the World Cup. But if he goes, you might think that he would want some clarity to be able to say a proper goodbye on the field. So I think we're going to get a bit more clarity on this in late April or early May. And then the release clause complicates things anyway, because even if Bruno Fernandes starts thinking that he wants to stay, my expectation, even though some suggest Bruno Fernandes will either stay at Man United or remain in Europe, my information is Saudi are going to go big over the summer. They're prepared to trigger the release clause, and there's multiple Saudi clubs that would like Bruno Fernandes. So it's all about whether is that move right for him and his family when it wasn't a year ago. But you got Cristiano Ronaldo's Al Nassr, Al Ittihad and Al Hilal still interested in Bruno Fernandes. But at this stage, he's going to take his time. We were led to believe last summer that he would reconsider his future after the World Cup. And I think that will hold true if he doesn't have an opportunity heading into the World Cup that he's really thinking about. But if someone comes to him or Manchester United in April and says, we want to do this now, and he chooses to leave, then like I said before, it might be more beneficial for him to have a proper goodbye on the football field. So yeah, we don't have the answer yet, but more clarity expected either towards the end of the season or potentially after the World Cup.
Yeah, we'll keep asking the question for sure, hopefully. I mean, I want him to stay, but it's going to be up to him, isn't it, in the end? So let's see what happens. Last question, Ben. We do this every single week, and I think, I enjoy listening to what you have to say and looking forward to what your score prediction is going to be. So everyone smash a like on the video. Also get your score predictions in while we're here. But score prediction for Manchester United versus Spurs, 12:30 Old Trafford kickoff tomorrow. It's an early one.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a Manchester United victory. They've got all of the momentum behind them. I got the Fulham win right, but not the score. I thought Man U would keep a clean sheet, and they didn't. This one, the opposite. So they're probably going to win the game 1-0, but I feel like Tottenham will score. But Manchester United much stronger and far more confident, and pressure is obviously mounting on Thomas Frank. He's had a couple of good results, particularly in the Champions League, but league form really poor. Tottenham only on 29 points. They've lost more games than they've won. They're conceding goals for fun. And I think at home, Manchester United will make it 4 wins on the bounce. And because it's 4 wins on the bounce, I'm going to go for Man United 4, Tottenham 1.
Wow. I would absolutely love that, Ben. I really hope that comes true. I might put a bet on that. But obviously, bet your own will. Don't follow what I'm doing.
Don't encourage anyone to bet, especially not off my predictions.
But I mean, 4-1. I'm going to go with 3-1 United. I'm going to go bold. I feel like that is quite bold. But still, I mean, it's 4th win in a row would be absolutely fantastic. Come on, Michael Carrick in United. There's a really good feel factor behind Manchester United at the moment. But before you tune in to all of the United Stand coverage of the game tomorrow, Manchester United versus Spurs, it does start on the United Stand. I will be here. Countdown to kick-off at 10:30 a.m. in the morning tomorrow. Make sure you're here. We've got some special guests that I'm not revealing yet, but it's going to be a banger of a show. So make sure you tune in. Also, Mark will be live with his watch-along at 12 p.m, running through all day. We'll then have the final score, the fans forum, so stay tuned. Hopefully we're celebrating the 4th win in a row for Michael Carrick. But before that, tonight on That's Football, you have Union Berlin versus Eintracht Frankfurt. It's 7:15. Watch along on That's Football. You get to watch the live game. You get to scout some players on there whilst Goldbridge is watching it along with you. So stay tuned for that. I'll be tuning in and having a look and typing in the live chat later. I'll actually go and do that because I do like to pop in and see how the Bundesliga is doing, and I do that through That's Football. And then tomorrow, after the United game on That's Football, you have Arsenal versus Sunderland. So that's going to be a banger as well at 3 p.m. kickoff. And on Sunday, you have the big Super Sunday, Liverpool versus Man City on That's Football, 4:30 p.m. as well. Champions League football. That's going to be a really interesting game for that one. So hopefully United can do the business on Saturday and we can all tune in to the Sunday and watch that game of Man City Liverpool. Daniel Griffith says, we all know if Bruno goes, we'll have zero structure in this team. He's the heart of our team and a leader. Probably the best we can get in the world right now. Raululo says, I feel that the World Cup will mean that we either need to act fast. We can't have another season in limbo. Either that or keep Carrick. Tuchel is not for me. Amit says, if a new religion is introduced, it's Bruno Fernandes. So a lot of people loving Bruno there in the comments. But look, everyone, thank you for tuning in on this Friday. Smash a like on the video if you've not already. And yeah, I mean, it's a Friday. We usually do these shows on a Thursday, Ben, but it's been good to speak to you on a Friday. And I've enjoyed all of the insight you've given us. So thank you so much for joining us. And also, for everybody that wants to pay the respects to the Munich air disaster, there will be a remembrance service held in 3 minutes' time outside Old Trafford. So I need to go and run down now. 2:45 till 3:15. Go and pay your respects. But if you're not in the area, just have a little moment to yourself to pay your respects to the Busby babes and the tragedy that did happen. Thank you, Ben, for joining us. I look forward to speak to you next time we're together, hopefully next week.
Look forward to it. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, and we will see you on the next one.